Hey guys, I'm Neil Barenblatt with Creative Cow, and this is my first cow tutorial, so I'm really excited about it, and I'm really stoked about being a member of this community and giving back. So let me start this thing off by saying, imagine a world where most splines and vibrary tags could essentially harness the ability to create an awesome stop-motion text effect inside of Cinema 4D. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if I may call you ladies and gentlemen, that's exactly what we're here to accomplish tonight. So by using these techniques, we're going to make a pretty sweet effect, as the one you've been watching is. And, why don't we just jump into Cinema 4D and see what we got, and I'll see you on the other side. The first thing we want to do before we start anything inside of Cinema 4D is get the font that we want. And, you can find most of the fonts you need, if not all of them, at dafont.com. Awesome site, tons of stuff. But I happen to know that we're going to use this font called Grenouli, Grenois, I don't know, however you pronounce it, thanks to the good people of France. So we're going to use this font, so all you got to do is go download it and install it on your machine. And then when we bring in our text, we can use that awesome font, which is very important to this effect because it's a very curly, papery font. The first thing we need to do is make a spline text object, and we're going to name it Jiggle. Great, awesome. Let's find our font. Grenouli. Okay, cool. Looks pretty girly and great, and that's what we want. So if you watch the other tutorial about making the text object dynamically update with what you type in, it's not really necessary here, but it's such a good habit to get into that we might as well just go ahead and do it. Basically, you just create an espresso tag and drop your object in there twice, or like I just copy and pasted the one that was already in there. And basically all we're going to do is attach the text input from here, make it an output here, and attach it to the input here and have this input be the name. So we're just going to attach those, and voila. Up in here it's Jiggle. If we were to type in, I don't know, craptastic, it's also going to say craptastic. So we're going to do all capitals Jiggle so that when we make a floor, it will more or less not seep into the floor, not bleed into it, because if you do lowercase, those G's and J's are really off. They're not really on the same level with the I and the L and the E, and we want to avoid that in this case. So I will type in Jiggle for like the 10th time. The next thing we want to do is bring this into MoSpline, and MoSpline on its own is an actual thing, so we're going to take a look at it. If we turn off Jiggle, we can see that MoSpline, once we click it on, actually brings up a spline. It's a really short spline, but it's really controllable within the MoSpline attributes. So if you click on MoSpline and go down to the attributes, you can see on the Object tab we have a few options, and what we want to look at right now is the start, the end, and the offset. And if you play around with these, you can see you can control the starting point, the end point, and the offset of the spline, which are pretty obvious by their names. If you go into the Simple tab, it starts to get a little more intense. You can increase or decrease the length. You can start to angle the thing differently, and then you really start getting cool when you start curving and bending and twisting to make this kind of tail thing. And if we zoom out a little bit and then offset it with all these new settings, you're going to get this really elaborate floral-like piggly wiggly, animation with your MoSpline. But we're not going to deal with all of those settings quite yet. We will, but not at the moment. We're going to delete that and re-put in the MoSpline so it's all reset. And what we want to look at first is referencing Jiggle, our original spline, with MoSpline. And so the way you do that is right here where it says Mode, it's selected as Simple right now, because this is the simple spline. But we want it to reference this one. So we're going to change it to spline, And then you can see this tab changes also from simple to spline. And in this tab, we have a text field for source spline, and we're just going to drag jiggle in there, and we can keep it off just like it is. And voila, most spline now references whatever we have here. So like before, we can just type in a bunch of letters, and most spline is going to recognize that. So let's bring it back to how we had it, and you know, you control the width of your spline. Haven't really played with that too much, but sure, if you know what you're doing, could do something cool. But yeah, so now we can control how this writes on, the offset, which does some pretty funky stuff. Kind of looks like a ninja star. And yeah, you know, it's just it's really interesting effects. But what we want to do is start to get this stuff to jiggle. And the first thing that we can kind of play with is the effectors in the MoGraph module, and that's what makes this so interesting, is that MoSpline, being an object of MoGraph, it can be affected by MoGraph's effectors. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. And we're going to use the formula effector. And so you can see we put it on it just completely screws it up. Well, that's because the formula effector uses this mathematical formula to create animation. And right now, it's making a pulsing sine wave. And if you've ever seen a sine wave, it looks like this. So pretend this is your animation, and you're going from, this is 1 right here. So you're going from 1 to -1, to 1 to -1, to 1 to -1, in completely even distances, so that it's a pulsing animation with absolutely no randomness, none of that. And while we want randomness, we'll get that effect regardless. But right now we just want some animation to it. So let's look at what we have it set as. And we don't want to mess with this too much. We will a little bit, because it's kind of hard to tell exactly what it means. I haven't studied it too much, but I do know what I want to change, and we'll get there. But first of all, this is not what we want. So if we go ahead and play through this right now, that's effing crazy. I mean, it's cool for, like, you know, Nickelodeon, but we're going to make something for, I mean, we're talking Cartoon Network here. We're on that level. So this is just too much. First of all, turn scale off. We don't need it to affect scale. And this is just way too much. So let's reduce this to 5, and let's set 5 to every dimension. Now, I mean, that's, you know, halfway between Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, so we're going to put it at about 2 for every dimension. And if, we can always change that, but I think for right now that's looking pretty cool. I think it's looking pretty good. Maybe if we put scale on, we can make that at like a 0.3 just to give it something. And rotation, probably like 1 degree and everything. You know, play around, try 5. I think that's a little too much. But I think I like the fact that we included rotation. You know, we don't want to discriminate. So maybe if we kept that at 5 and brought this down to 1. Cool. Let's do that. Can always change it later. The next thing I want to notice is that it's moving really slow. I'm not sure I like how slow it's moving, because it's not really going to give the effect. And so up in the formula is where you control the speed. And that's actually being controlled by this number right here. It's, you know, to me it's arbitrary, but I do know that it affects the speed, because I, you know, futzed with it, and voila. So if we change it from 360 to, let's say, 600, and look at this animation, it's doing its thing a little faster, but, you know, not nearly fast enough. We're actually going to double this and see what happens. Yeah, now that's what I'm talking about. Now we're getting this kind of like, hey, it looks like we're repeating the same 3 or 4 frames over again, like we would stop motion, or like some might stop motion, like I would stop motion, because, you know, I'm not the most unlazy person ever. But no, anyway, I think this is starting to get closer to the effect we want. The other thing we can notice right now is that, I mean, I don't know how it looks on the screen cap, but it's pretty smooth, and stop motion is not this smooth. And that's due to the fact that we're running at 30 frames per second right now, and we can change that within the project. You're going to have to change it again when you render out, but within the project we can actually work in the frame setting that we want. And the way you do that is to go to Edit and Project Settings. And right here you can see the frames per second is set at 30. And we want to be working at 10. I think that gives us a good look. And so, you know, now we have 30 frames of stuff to work with, and we can always increase that. But if we play it, yeah, that's starting to look like some pretty crappy stop motion, and that's what we want. So maybe we can make this like 60 frames for now, just so we have a little more jiggle room. Awesome. So the next thing we want to do is actually give some geometry to our word. And we're just going to take the mow spline and make it a child of the extrude NURBS by just holding Alt or Option, and then the mow spline is a child. And we can increase that a little bit so it's a little more evident. And render it, and yeah, we have legitimate geometry, and that looks pretty sweet. So we have our jiggle, we have the fact that it is jiggling. Now we want it to write on using some of MoGraph's end and offset and start properties. We're actually not going to touch start, we're only going to touch the end and offset. And so first let's have it come on period. So what we're going to do is we're going to keyframe the end. So you right click, Animation, Add Keyframe, and let's actually bring it to 0 and do that again, because that's how awesome I am. And then at 30 frames, let's have it be at 100%. So if we go back and play that, it writes on just like so. Pretty cool. I don't really want it to write on letter by letter. I kind of want everything to come on at the same time in its own little unique way. And so the way you do that in mow spline is right here where it says the grow mode. It's doing complete spline, so it's going to go from one end to the next. If we make this separate segments and replay it, it's actually going to grow everything separately and treat everything as a separate object rather than as one spline. So that's more the effect I'm going for. I need some randomness and some craziness to it though. And I think that's where the offset's really going to shine. So let's keyframe the offset at frame 0. And now that I think about it, let's bring it back about 50 or so %, right about there. And keyframe it again. And then I think after, oh my god, that's freaking insane. And we'll fix it. Trust me. So a little bit after the end finishes its animation, let's bring the offset back to 0. So it can linger on a little bit longer than the write-on of our animation. So now we start to see that all this random crazy stuff happens, and that's what we want. We want it to look like we threw a bunch of paper together. But it's really jagged and really bad looking, for lack of a better word. So we can play with a few more settings in mow spline, and the one I do want to play with is this generation mode right here. We want to change it from vertex to even. So if we go back and play that, now it's starting to look like that paper's writing on. That's exactly what we're looking for. And we can make this count to 1,000 to give it a little more detail and a little more, yeah, now that's what we want it to look like. It just looks more, it looks smoother, and this paper's kind of coming on the way we want it. It looks like little paper rolls. That's awesome. So we're going to hold on to that and for dear life and love it for what it is. The next thing we want to do is get the ribbons to go around it. We just want to make some really simple ribbons to kind of sell the paper effect. And what we're going to do is we're going to create some mow splines and attach some geometry to them and just start and stop them. And this is a pretty easy, repetitive process. So let's go ahead and do it, get it out of the way so we can do some cool rendering stuff. So we're just going to create a mow spline. And yeah, we're going to get to use the mow spline on its own. So let's rotate it. In fact, why would we do that when we can just angle it? How awesome is that? Let's angle it up a little bit, and let's bring it a little more this way, and we can curve it and bend it up and maybe even twist it that way so it doesn't run into our letter. Z. Awesome. And let's make it a little longer. Okay. So when we go to offset it, that's exactly what I'm looking for. We just get this bottom to top animation. So let's offset it from -100 to 100 over the course of from frame 0, because this one's going to be pretty visible. And to set a keyframe right here, I'm really just control clicking this property. You can also go into animation by right clicking and add keyframe. Either way, I just think this is quicker. So from frame 0 to frame 38, let's say, or I think the other offset was on 38, so we'll bring it to 40 and go all the way to 100. Keyframe it again. Now if we watch, yeah, we get this really cool ribbon animation. So we can create now another mow spline and kind of do the same thing, but in a different position and with different settings. So we can maybe add some segments, add some steps, angle it. Oh, maybe we don't want to add segments. Cool. Just trying, you know, always got to try things. Add angle this way, you know, curve it, adjust all these things, and then we can make some different offsets. So offset it from, let's do from 100 on frame 6 to on frame 54 -100. Let's go the opposite way. So now if we go and play from the beginning, cool, we have a few interesting different designs. And I'm just going to go ahead and make a few more of these and come back. Okay, so now we have quite a few of these mow splines. I added, so we have 5 total. So if we go back and play through this animation, we get these crisscrossing really cool ribbons. Not too many, not too few. So the next thing we need to do is add our floor so that we have something to play off of. And the floor is located either in your scene objects if you're in 11.5, or over click right here on the light and you can find the floor right there. So let's scrub through and see clearly that our letters are pushing into it. And so we're going to adjust all this right now. Let's bring our floor down so that the bottom is touching the J right there. But the word's just kind of off kilter, period. So we're going to just take the extrude nerd and rotate it so that we're more or less as even as we can be. And let's find the floor and bring this down so that, yeah, so the J and the 2 G's, I think that's when it's important that they are that they're touching the floor. We're going to say that those are important. So let's move around a little bit, and cool. Looks terrible. Not for long though, don't you worry. So next thing we need to do is give our ribbons geometry, and we're going to do that the same way that we did our jiggle. We're just going to make them all parents of their own extrude NURBs, just like so. And after you've done that, what we can notice is that the way our camera's facing, a lot of these just aren't as visible as we'd like them to be. So what we're going to have to do is rotate some of these extrusions by going into the extrude NURBS object and seeing that the movement of the extrusion is actually not in the axis we want it to be in. So we're going to select, for instance, this one right here would look much better facing us. So inside of the extrude object, instead of having the extrusion movement in the z-axis, we're actually going to have it in the y-axis, just right there, just, you know, 15. And so now it's facing us, and we get a much better sense that this is, in fact, a giant ribbon. And I think I'm having the same problem with this one right here. So let's find that one, extrude NURBS 2, and let's bring it to about 15 meters in this axis. So now if we go back and play through it, yeah, we get a much better idea. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. And if you change your display to hidden line, you can kind of see everything a little better. And everything's going to become much more apparent once we texture it, which we can go ahead and do right now. So in our materials box, in our tab, let's create a texture, and let's sort of color everything here. So let's take this one and make it a nice blue jean blue. And that's how we're going to texture the jiggle. Just like so. So if we go ahead and render, we can see now we have this blue. And this would be a lot more apparent if we turn back on garage shading. And then let's copy this texture and make it a dark red. And say OK. And put it on one of our splines. And then we can copy that and make kind of a green. Put that on another one of our splines. And just do this a few times until we have 5 or 6 different colors. I think a yellow is definitely in order. Why not? And perhaps an orange. So let's give us an orange. Cancel is not the right button. Let's give us an orange. Orange. And don't want to leave this one out to dry. So let's copy this and let's give it, I don't know. How about a pink? Come on, it's paper. Paper can be pink. So now if we go ahead and render it, everything's colored except for the ground. And for the ground, what we're actually going to do is use a texture I found of notebook paper to further sell the effect. So we're going to make a new texture, and in the color parameter, we're going to load a texture from our computer. And on my desktop right there, I have this PNG. Cool. And we're going to apply that to the floor. And so now, if I render, it looks pretty awful. So I think once we light it, we'll be able to see this a little more. We're going to collapse all of this so I can see just a little bit better what I'm doing. Okay. So let's go ahead and light it. And to light it, if you have, I think the best way to light this is either with, global illumination or ambient occlusion, or if you have Grayscale Gorilla's Light Kit Pro. I actually wanted to try and see if I could make my own light after seeing Grayscale Gorilla's, and I did. So I made my own softbox with a few user data settings that I think were good enough for me, and so that's what I'm going to use. And it's basically an area light with an area shadow where I can control the detail, the intensity, the kind of light, the color, the scale. I can reset the position after I move it, and all that good stuff. And it always moves. If I zoom out a bunch, it always moves right around the middle, just like that. So if I bring it down and go ahead and give this a good old render, we get some pretty cool looking stuff. It's really dark, and we're going to fix that, but we get some cool looking stuff. Before we fix anything else, let's take care of this paper texture, because that's bothering me a lot. So the way we're going to do that is on the floor, our texture tag is right here, and we're basically going to make this a lot smaller length. So let's make it 20% on both of the lengths, and go ahead and render that again and see what happens. I think that's looking a lot better. It needs to be rotated, and it also needs to be a little more contrasty. And believe it or not, we can actually adjust the look of an image inside of Cinema without ever touching Photoshop. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to go into the texture, and right next to where our paper is, we're going to click this arrow and select Filter. And inside of Filter, if we click on it, we have a bunch of options. And right now it's just, let's go ahead and make this huge so we can see what we're doing. It's just hard to see much, and part of that's because the specular's on. So we can turn that off, and we can adjust all of these settings to get something more desirable. So let's adjust the contrast and then take down the brightness. And already I think we can see the blue lines just a little bit better. So if we just fool with those for a second and then re-render, yeah, I think those lines are much more apparent. I think it needs to be more saturated. And we definitely need to rotate everything. So we're just going to rotate the whole floor 90 degrees. and go ahead and render that again. Yeah, I think that's much better. But now after looking at it, it looks like our paper looks really weird. And I think that's because we have our texture much too small. So we're going to bring these back up to 70. Okay, I can see without really noticing that I did it, I made these way too small, and now it's rotated the wrong way. So we're going to go ahead and rotate it back to how it was. Now, somehow it's like more apparent now. Whatevs. So let's make this 150, still too small. I was a little confused and did everything in this part backwards. So rather than like try and figure out where I went wrong, I'm just going to correct it right now. So let's make these 300, and that might be fine. No, it's not. So let's keep sizing them up. So 500. Eat that. And let's go ahead and render. And there's our notebook paper that we're looking for. And you can, it looks like my texture's off a little bit right here. So you can go ahead and adjust that to your heart's content until it looks right. And for right now, I'm just going to keep it as is. And I'm also going to, on my softbox, I'm going to turn down the shadow detail for right now, so our renders are a little bit faster. Cool. Maybe even take it down to right about there. Yeah, just so we can kind of play around a little bit more. Just because I can see it now, I'm going to make the texture 700% and move it on over, as the Hank would say. Yeah, and for right now, that's going to do great. The other thing we can do is just brighten this up a little more in general. And we're going to do that with a few spotlights. So let's make a spotlight, drag it over, and rotate it 90 degrees. And bring it up, just position these a little bit, and point them down at our letters. And we can increase the outer angle a little bit. We're definitely going to take this down, the intensity. We can also drag this so that we can make sure it's really lighting the whole word. Yeah, I definitely think that's giving us a little more light. I think we're gonna go ahead and copy and paste that and just bring this over to the other side and light it the same way. Rotate it 180 degrees. We can just do that right here. So to get it to 180, we'll just move it from -90 to 90 and point it down. So now if we render, yeah, we definitely have a lot more light. The other thing we want to do is make it so the floor isn't affected by these lights at all. And so we actually have to exclude the floor from what the lights can see. And the way you do that is, inside of the light, there is a parameter box called scene. And you can say, hey, exclude whatever, whatever the damn I tell you to. Be firm with it. This is, don't be a slave to this thing. That's not what it's for. So drag floor in there and do the same for both lights. So now we're going to re-render, and voila. Everything else is lit a lot better and a lot more evenly, except for the paper. And the paper, actually looking at it now, it could be brighter. So we're going to go back into the filter and brighten it up just a little bit. Not that much. Yeah, I think that's looking good. And if you wanted to take it out in After Effects and have your way with it, that's what it's there for. But I'm going to do this solely in Cinema right now and just lighten it up. Just lighten it up. Just like so. Render. Cool. And let's turn back on some of our detail and see what it looks like as of now. So yeah, that looks pretty sweet, and we can play through it and see that we're getting a lot of what we want. The other thing right now is these most splines aren't giving me a very stop motion-y feel. And there's a certain way to give them this sort of violent, yet subtle and not violent, shake about them that makes it feel like they're sort of all over the place. And you do that with a vibrate tag in Cinema 4D. So on our extrude NURBS, we're going to right click Cinema 4D tags and go to vibrate right there. And this is just going to create, I mean, it's the same thing as wiggle in After Effects. And so let's enable the position and put it at about 5 meters on each axis. And so now if we go ahead and play that, we can see this one right here is giving us a little bit of shake. Actually about the amount we want. We want all of them to vary a little bit, but yeah, that's giving us a good amount of shake. So let's control click and copy it onto the other one, onto the next ribbon. And let's give this maybe 3, 4, 5, just pretty randomly, and increase the frequency to 4. And which one are we looking at? We are looking at this one in the back right here. So let's, you know, we know it's shaking. Let's put it on one that's more visible to us. So we're going to look at this one right here. Yeah, we're getting a good shake there. Let's increase this to 6 and bring this down to 2, 1, 2. Okay, yeah, this definitely needs to be about at 3. Yeah, that's a pretty decent shake. So let's now, you know, instead of just doing it all, you know, making a bunch of these, we can just copy this one, and I think that was double copy. So just bring that up there. Now everything's shaking a little bit, except for the camera. So let's go ahead and do that by creating a camera and just dropping one of these vibrates on it. And so now even the camera vibrates, and we can probably bring that up a little bit. Maybe that's a little too much. I think for this little demo, that is borderline perfect. So now if we go back and to our softbox and bring the shadow detail back up and go ahead and render a frame, that's looking pretty damn awesome. I think there's playing to be had with the texture. I think if you wanted to avoid some of this background, you could add some depth of field. So we can go ahead and do that by going to the top view. And this green box is the depth of the camera. So if we go into the camera and just decrease the depth to, let's say, our word, right there, you can see it right in this box, in the right box right there. And then over in the render settings, give me some depth of field, and go ahead and render this again. And don't forget, we also need to put on rear blur, which I just rendered it without it and nothing happened. So that's it. That is the jiggle stop motion effect with text. And I think it's pretty cool. I think we get a pretty decent effect with it. And, you know, I think there's a lot more possibilities than what you see on the screen in front of you. This is just kind of a cool way to get started and to have your text animate on just like that. All right, thanks guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed it and you know, are taking something home with you to create awesomeness and really take this to the next level. If you have any questions, just, you know, ask them on the comment in the forum here, and I'll do my best to answer. And you know, I really appreciate it. Stay tuned for more here at Creative Cow. I'm Neil Barenblatt, and I'll see you guys soon.